A transgender man found themselves disappointed with masculinity, and so they decided to write a review of it. I thought I knew what it meant to be a man. Then I transitioned into one. Written by Teek Milan and published by The Guardian. They say, I thought becoming a man was a righteous undertaking, but manhood is deeply bruised at the smallest slight while pretending to be a pillar of strength. 0 out of 10. Hashtag masculinity so fragile. Would not bro again. Personally, I don't have an issue with my manhood getting bruised, though it is true that it's not always a pillar of strength, just when I'm excited. If you look this guy up, you will see that they pass really well in terms of appearance. So of course I thought this person must have something unique to share. I was prepared to be challenged. And then I started reading. Running through Penn Station in New York City, sweating and out of breath, I was moments away from dropping my 4 huge duffel bags and missing my train. I saw an Amtrak employee, flagged him down, and hurriedly asked him to help me get my bags to the gate. Help you with your bags? He looked at me with disgust, then rolled his eyes and walked away. I stood there confused and embarrassed, wondering what I could have done that was so offensive. Did I break some man code about asking for help? Normally, I'm sure if you ask someone who works at a train station in a major city to lug your giant bags of shit around for free, they'll be more than happy to help you with a smile on their face. This is definitely a gender issue. It's just like when you ask for a lighter and someone tells you they don't have one. That's actually always a lie. They definitely have one. They just believe a man should provide his own lighter. Wouldn't it have been a better example of fragile masculinity that needs to be proved? If this guy had run up to the writer, screaming and flexing, tore off his shirt, grabbed all 4 of these bags, carried them around in one hand, dislocating his wrist, not crying, and asking for more bags. Okay, so you might think that was just a throwaway comment to start an article with, but no, this was apparently a defining moment in their life. As a transgender man, I've had to cultivate my manhood. Just as a side note, that would be a good euphemism for phalloplasty, instead of being born into it, so I have taken deliberate time and intention to examine tropes of masculinity, to interrogate what I wanted and what I didn't want to engage in. But it was in that moment, on the Amtrak platform, that I still had a lot to learn about this fraternal order of pride and masculinity that I was about to join. Personally, I'd have thought the lesson would be, people won't do that for free. But what do I know? I'm a cis white male. I need to learn from an expert. In fact, I think this guy should make an educational video series, Tropes versus Masculinity in Train Stations. So if that is something that surprised them about masculinity, what did they think masculinity was? I'd thought becoming a man was a righteous undertaking. Guess it's actually some evil shit then. It was about setting an example that is strong and compassionate, that listens and protects, that is self-motivated. I was going to be a part of a population of people who were stoic, strong and pragmatic, pillars of our community and protectors of the family, a brotherhood of responsibility and care. I was ready to transition not just into a masculinized body, but a masculine way of being. In short, I wanted to be an action hero. See, this is the same reason you don't get hyped for video games. It sounds like this guy pre-ordered Masculinity from Todd Howard. And then, of course, when you find out all that stuff doesn't come as part of the package, you get really annoyed, you feel like you've been ripped off, and maybe you react a bit more negatively than you otherwise would have to what you got. Maybe a bit like this. As I went further into my transition, more often passing as a man, I found out that the reality of manhood didn't always jibe with my original romanticized notions. I've learned that manhood is deeply bruised at the smallest slight, while pretending to be a pillar of strength and stoicism. There are very rigid ideas that define masculinity as something that denies itself vulnerability in any aspect, be it pain, sadness, compassion, or affection. Can't you just feel yourself gazing over a precipice into a sudden downward slide? This is being passed off as someone seeing the reality after having some kind of idealized image in their mind. But they're really just going from one extreme to the other. They've managed to massively overcomplicate a brief encounter at a train station, and then I think oversimplify the idea of manhood as something terrible, and it only gets worse. These very basic emotions that make us human are shamed and mocked. I've literally been laughed at by a cisgender man. And you will be many more times if you keep talking like that. Let's start that again. I've literally been laughed at by a cisgender man for being too, quote-unquote, emotionally invested when I showed outward or enthusiastic love and affection for my wife, whom I love boldly and with no reservations. As a black, queer and trans couple, it's important for us to be models of love and possibility for our community. Why can't you just be yourselves? But it read to him as weakness and bad judgment. The scenario he's asking us to believe happened and take as representative of manhood is maybe him going, "Oh, I love my wife so much," and someone stepping in to say, "You're too emotionally invested." Bearing in mind how this guy interpreted someone being less than polite and helpful at a train station in a major city, how well do you think this interpretation likely reflects whatever happened? Could it possibly be that he got laughed at because he was being a little bit ridiculous? Is that something that could maybe have been the case? Of course not. Sorry, what was I thinking just then? Our friend here goes on to explain the root cause of this behavior, why it happens. Bros before hoes, or "these girls ain't loyal," are more than just funny quips on a t-shirt or a hook in a hip-hop song. They are ideas that precede us and have an enduring hold on how we view masculinity. Maybe how you view masculinity. And they've made embodying healthy masculinity an uphill battle. So which t-shirts and songs should I base my identity on? God, it's like when you come across someone who's into a new diet fad, except for manhood instead of a flat belly. Like how when someone stops eating gluten, all of a sudden, everyone's problems are because they eat gluten. And I don't know why, but they have to sell it to other people. They would go door knocking like Jehovah's Witnesses if they thought it would work. Which is the path this writer seems to be going down. He says, "I'm constantly embroiled in arguments and debates and dialogues with cisgender heterosexual men about our treatment of women and the violent and vile sexism that influences our relationships." How do you think he starts that conversation? "Oh, hey, how's it going, mate? Have you spent any time today thinking about how violent sexism permeates your intimate relationships? The masculinity I present looks more heteronormative and passable, but that doesn't mean that this is the standard. Masculinity manifests in a myriad of ways, and no one is more valuable than the other. This is the thing that gets me. You've got this progressive inclusive thing of all masculinities are equally valuable, and you've got to have a healthy masculinity going on at the same time. To me, there is a clash here. How can you talk about embodying a healthy masculinity and at the same time say no one masculinity is more valuable than the other? Surely the implication is there is unhealthy masculinity, which surely isn't as valuable. How about instead of having these pathologized, toxic or fragile masculinities, you go emotionless and try to force other people to be too? Fuck off, that's not masculinity. Violence and abuse? No, fuck off, that's not masculinity. It is not manhood, and it is not required to be a man. Define what you think it is and isn't, and argue about that, instead of effectively just throwing it away and letting it be airy-fairy anything. If you care about how manhood and masculinity is viewed, I think that would be more effective, personally, but maybe not as inclusive. Let's give the writer a chance though. What's he gonna do with his own personal manhood? "I've had to step away from everything I thought I knew about being a man and everything the world told me it was supposed to be, in order to develop a manhood that worked with femininity and wasn't diametrically opposed to it or afraid of it." Okay. I want my manhood to be something that isn't seeped in irrational entitlement. What, like expecting people to carry your bags? And fear that leads to violence. The usual fragile, toxic masculinity thing. I want my manhood to create space, not take it all up, that doesn't assume any rank or entitlement over anyone because they aren't men or masculine. This is really starting to sound like he ate a feminist textbook for breakfast and then puked it up onto The Guardian. This fucker has said he has needed to step away from every idea he had about being a man, and perhaps more importantly, every idea the world was telling him, and presumably every other man. He's been talking about the ideas that precede us, that have an enduring hold on how we view masculinity. So this applies to everyone else too, and he says he's needed to step away from this in order to have a manhood where fear doesn't lead him to violence. What does that say about every other man who hasn't done what he's done? Hey buddy, fuck you. And let's finish this off with the last paragraph, which is just amazing. "I know that compassion and love are not emotional weaknesses, but are the points where inclusion and empathy begin. Being a good guy is deliberate. Deconstructing sexist ideology and not engaging in entitlement that subjugates anyone is hard work, and has to be done every single day. But when I look at myself in the mirror and love the man looking back, it's all worth it. It's like Barney the dinosaur meets some kind of gender cult. Love and compassion are good. You should try to be a good guy. And always remember, deconstructing sexist ideology is a challenging daily task that must be undertaken." Yeah, as fun as that sounds, I think I'm going to stick with my manhood and masculinity the way they are. But, as usual, that's just another one of my harmful opinions.